The office was unusually quiet that Thursday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, bouncing off the polished floors and reflecting softly on the stacks of files that lined the walls. Michael sat at his desk, his fingers moving across the keyboard in a mechanical rhythm. Reports, spreadsheets, emails, everything demanded his attention. Yet his mind kept wandering. He couldn't ignore the small flicker of movement across the office. It was Anna. She had started only a few weeks ago. A bright new marketing associate with a calm presence and an attention to detail that immediately stood out. Today, she was arranging papers on a nearby desk, methodical and focused. Yet Michael noticed something he hadn't before. She kept glancing in his direction. Not casually, not as part of normal office awareness, but with a certain hesitation, a subtle awareness that he noticed instantly. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that instant Michael felt an unexpected tension. Her eyes were curious, soft, yet something else lingered behind them, a hint of vulnerability, a spark he could not name. She gave him a polite, almost shy smile before turning back to her work, pretending to be entirely absorbed in organizing files. But the fleeting glance lingered in his mind longer than it should have, leaving a strange warmth in his chest and a tension he couldn't quite shake. He shook his head lightly, trying to focus on his reports. This was the office. Boundaries existed for a reason. Michael was experienced, respected, and careful about maintaining professionalism. And yet something about her presence made him acutely aware of every movement, every small gesture. It wasn't a simple attraction. He realized it was the magnetic pull of curiosity, of emotional awareness, of noticing someone in a way that made his carefully structured day feel slightly unpredictable. Over the next few days, Michael found himself noticing more than just Anna's presence. He observed the way she tapped her pen absent-mindedly when thinking, the soft laughter she shared quietly with colleagues, the subtle hesitations in her steps when she approached his desk with questions. Each small detail became a point of focus, a thread weaving a connection neither of them had verbalized. He reminded himself constantly that this was dangerous territory. He was her senior. She was young, intelligent, and had an entire career ahead of her. And yet the simple fact of noticing her, of being aware of her, brought a sense of life back into him that he hadn't felt in years. He had dedicated himself to work, to structure, to routines. But this was something else entirely. Anna herself was not unaware of the tension. She, too, noticed Michael, and not just because he was her boss. There was a warmth in the way he approached his work, a thoughtfulness in the way he interacted with the team, a quiet authority that didn't intimidate but inspired. She caught herself glancing at him across meetings, at lunch, at her desk when he walked past. Her heart would quicken for reasons she couldn't fully explain. And each glance held a mix of curiosity and unspoken questions. On Friday afternoon, the office was nearly empty. Most of the team had gone to an early gathering, leaving Michael to finish reports and Anna to tidy her workspace. It was quiet enough that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed loud in contrast to the silence. Anna approached his desk with a small question about a report. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly, almost hesitantly. "I wanted to clarify something about the campaign numbers." Michael looked up, forcing a professional tone, though his chest tightened unexpectedly. "Of course. What do you need?" They bent over the spreadsheet together, shoulders nearly brushing. Each movement was careful, subtle, but there was an awareness, unspoken, electric, fragile. Neither spoke more than necessary, but the air between them grew heavier with every second. A sudden laugh from somewhere else in the office startled them, breaking the tension. They both looked up at each other and, for a heartbeat, felt as if the world had shrunk to the distance between their desks. Then Anna smiled lightly, stepping back. "I'll figure it out," she said, though the softness of her voice carried a hint of uncertainty, almost as if she sought reassurance without asking directly. Michael nodded, forcing a professional smile, though inside he felt an unusual warmth and curiosity that he couldn't ignore. That weekend, he found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. Her presence lingered in his mind like a soft echo. the weight of her unspoken glance pressing gently against the edges of his thoughts. He reminded himself constantly. She was a colleague, he was her senior, and boundaries existed for a reason. And yet, that simple connection, the recognition of one another across the office, felt profound, unexpected, and impossible to dismiss. The following Monday, the routine continued. Michael noticed the small way she interacted with others, the slight pauses before she spoke, the way her eyes searched the room occasionally, only to find his. Every glance, every interaction was subtle, professional, yet it carried a weight that neither could articulate. And each moment left both of them quietly aware of a growing tension, the kind that was emotional, intimate in a human sense, but still unspoken, still unacted upon. One afternoon, Michael was reviewing reports at his desk when Anna approached again, this time with a printed presentation for an upcoming campaign. As she placed the documents on his desk, their fingers brushed lightly. Neither spoke immediately, both aware of the unspoken electricity in that brief contact. Michael looked at her and saw the slight hesitation, the quiet acknowledgement in her eyes. He understood in that moment that she felt it too, the mutual recognition of something delicate, something forbidden in the professional context, yet undeniably present. "I appreciate your help," he said carefully, maintaining the proper tone. Though his voice carried a softness that mirrored the unspoken connection, Anna nodded. A faint blush on her cheeks, her voice low. "I'm happy to help. You've been supportive. It means a lot." They both returned to their respective tasks, yet the atmosphere had shifted slightly. There was an awareness between them now, a mutual understanding of a subtle bond forming. It wasn't overt, it wasn't romantic in a traditional sense, but it was there, a human connection, charged, delicate, and entirely emotional by the end of the day. Michael found himself staring out the office window, reflecting on the week. He realized that this connection, this recognition of one another, had made his days feel fuller, his work feel more meaningful, and his life feel slightly more vibrant. It was a new awareness, one he couldn't entirely explain, one he hadn't felt in years. Anna, too, left her desk later than usual, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had never felt this way toward a colleague before. It wasn't inappropriate desire. It was the sensation of being truly seen and acknowledged by someone she respected and admired. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of anticipation for work, not the tasks themselves, but the human interactions, the subtle connection, the unspoken understanding of a shared presence. As she walked out of the office, she glanced back at Michael's desk. He looked up from his reports for a fleeting second and met her eyes. That single, silent exchange carried the weight of weeks of observation, emotion, and subtle longing. Neither spoke, neither acted, but both understood. Something was forming, delicate, profound, and entirely unspoken. That night, both Michael and Anna lay in their separate homes thinking of the office, thinking of the glances, the brushes of hands, the quiet acknowledgement of mutual awareness. It was emotional, it was confusing, it was thrilling, and it was only the beginning for Michael. It was a reminder that human connection could exist in quiet ways, in unspoken gestures, in fleeting interactions that carried more meaning than words. For Anna, it was the realization that admiration, respect, and subtle attraction could intertwine, creating a profound emotional resonance even in a professional setting. By the time the week ended, the tension had become almost tangible. Michael returned to his desk Monday morning with a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. Anna approached with her usual calm, but there was a glimmer in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of them could ignore. It was the start of something unspoken, a delicate connection, emotional and profound, forming silently amidst reports, spreadsheets, and office routines. And while the rules remained clear, the boundaries intact, the human heart had begun to notice. The air between them was charged with something forbidden, yet completely safe, and emotional intimacy, a spark of human understanding that neither could yet define, but both could feel. The next morning, Michael arrived at the office earlier than usual, carrying his usual stack of reports. The quiet hum of the building greeted him as he settled at his desk, aware that Anna would arrive soon. He couldn't deny the flutter in his chest as he thought about the previous evening, the lingering smiles, the subtle touches, the way their connection had deepened without a single word being said explicitly. It was exhilarating yet carefully restrained. When Anna walked in, her presence immediately filled the room. She moved with her usual calm, professional grace. But there was a noticeable sparkle in her eyes, a quiet anticipation that Michael recognized instantly. The energy between them was electric, charged yet delicate, like a thread stretched taut, but not yet broken. He felt it in the brush of her fingers as she handed him a folder, in the way her gaze met his across the room, and in the subtle tilt of her head as she spoke. Today, they had to prepare a major presentation together. The client was expecting detailed insights, and their coordination had to be seamless. As they worked side by side, every small movement, every glance, every laugh carried the weight of the connection they had been nurturing for weeks. There was tension, yes, but it was the kind of tension that energized rather than distracted. Michael noticed Anna's attention to detail, the care with which she handled charts and documents. And yet, beneath the professional exterior, there was an awareness, a shared recognition that neither could fully articulate at one point. As Michael leaned over the desk to adjust a chart, their hands brushed lightly. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a small jolt through both of them. They looked up at each other, eyes locking, and for a moment, the world outside the office ceased to exist. No words were needed. The connection was silent but undeniable. It was the culmination of weeks of shared moments, subtle gestures. An unspoken understanding. Anna broke the silence first. Michael, can I be honest? Her voice was low, steady, but carried a vulnerability he had come to recognize and cherish. Always, he replied, meeting her gaze without hesitation. I've been feeling something. Something I can't ignore, she admitted. Her words were carefully measured, professional, yet deeply personal. It's not about work, and it's not inappropriate to feel, but I can't pretend it's not there. Michael's heart tightened. He had felt the same for weeks, the emotional pull that neither of them acted on, yet could not deny. I feel it too, he said softly. I've tried to keep it in check, but it's impossible to ignore when it's this real. They returned to their work, but the dynamic had shifted. Every task, every chart, every discussion carried an undercurrent of emotional intimacy. Their proximity was professional, but the emotional closeness made the room feel smaller, more intense, more private. They moved with unspoken coordination, understanding each other's rhythms, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating the next step without needing instructions later. As they reviewed the final slides for the client presentation, Michael noticed Anna's eyes lingering on him again. It was not a casual glance, but a deliberate, searching look that spoke volumes. He met her gaze, and in that silent exchange, the depth of their connection was unmistakable. Anna then reached for the corner of the folder he was holding, her fingers brushing his deliberately this time. The contact was fleeting, but it was loaded with unspoken meaning, acknowledgement, trust, and a shared emotional vulnerability. After the slides were ready, they leaned back in their chairs, taking a brief moment of respite. The office was quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights above providing a soft soundtrack. Michael realized that this connection, this delicate emotional thread between them, had become the most significant part of his day. It was not about attraction alone. It was about understanding, recognition, and a profound bond that neither had expected to find in an office environment. Anna spoke again, her voice low but confident. Michael, I've never felt this way about a colleague before. It's strange, but it feels right? He nodded, understanding completely. It does feel right, he admitted, even if we can't act on it recklessly, even if it has to remain unspoken in public. It doesn't make it any less real. Their eyes met, and for a long moment they simply acknowledged each other. There was no rush, no impulsive decision, no crossing of boundaries, just recognition. It was a mutual understanding that feelings existed, that they were valid, and that they could coexist with the professionalism their workplace demanded. As the day went on, they moved through tasks with ease, but every interaction carried the subtle weight of their emotional connection. When Michael spoke, Anna listened with attention that went beyond simple professionalism. When Anna presented data, Michael's feedback was more careful, more considerate, and infused with a quiet admiration he had not needed to hide before. They had reached a stage where emotions and professionalism coexisted harmoniously, creating a rhythm that was both efficient and deeply personal. In the late afternoon, after the client had approved the presentation, the office was nearly empty. Michael and Anna stayed behind to organize materials and finalize reports. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, yet charged with the quiet intensity that had developed over the past weeks. Anna approached him with a stack of papers, and as she handed them over, their fingers touched again. This time the gesture was deliberate but restrained, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and emotional intimacy they shared. "Michael," Anna began, her voice soft but steady, "I don't know where this will lead. I don't know if we can ever act on it openly. But I needed you to know that I care, more than I can explain." Michael felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, warmth, and connection. "I care too," he said quietly, "and I think it's okay to feel this way, even if we have to navigate it carefully." They spent a few more moments organizing papers, sharing small smiles, exchanging glances that spoke volumes without words. There was no haste, no impulsive movement, only the quiet, steady presence of someone who truly understood and acknowledged them. It was emotional intimacy in its purest form, subtle, profound, and entirely safe within the boundaries they had set by the time they left the office together. The evening sky was painted with hues of gold and pink. Their conversation was light, almost playful, yet every word carried the weight of their shared understanding. As they reached the building entrance, they paused, neither wanting to break the fragile emotional bond that had grown so naturally. Michael smiled gently. "See you tomorrow?" he asked, his tone warm, professional, but laced with personal sincerity. Anna nodded, her eyes reflecting the same warmth. "Tomorrow," she replied, as they parted. Both walked to their cars with a quiet awareness that this connection, this delicate, emotional, romantic bond was unlike anything they had experienced before. It was not about physical attraction alone. It was about recognition, understanding, and the courage to feel deeply while maintaining respect and professionalism. Over the following weeks, this pattern continued. Small gestures, shared laughter, meaningful glances, all the subtleties of emotional intimacy became part of their daily routine. They had discovered a way to balance feelings with responsibilities, creating a safe space for the heart to recognize what the mind could not fully act upon. By the end of part 3, Michael and Anna understood that their story was not defined by overt actions, but by the quiet acknowledgement of feelings. The forbidden was not acted upon recklessly. It existed in the recognition of emotional truth, in the shared moments of vulnerability, and in the courage to feel deeply in a professional world. They had found a rare, meaningful connection, one built on trust, respect, and emotional honesty. Theirs was a story of subtle romance, quiet longing, and restrained emotional passion. A story of two hearts recognizing each other in a place where rules demanded distance. Yet human emotion demanded acknowledgement. It was unforgettable, transformative, and entirely safe for the world outside the office to hear a story of love, connection, and the beauty of unspoken understanding. Michael stared at the note on his desk for a long moment, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. "Meet me in the lounge after everyone leaves. I need to talk." The handwriting was unmistakably Anna's, neat, careful, and deliberate. His mind raced, but not with fear or suspicion. Instead, it was a whirlwind of curiosity, caution, and something deeper he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. He knew the office rules, knew the boundaries, knew the risk of any inappropriate action. And yet the simple request carried a weight he could not ignore by the time the evening rolled around. The office was nearly empty. Michael lingered at his desk, pretending to finish reports, but his thoughts kept drifting toward the lounge. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint glow of the overhead lights. Even the creak of the office chairs seemed louder than usual. And then he saw her. Anna appeared at the entrance of the lounge, her posture slightly hesitant, yet determined. Her eyes met his immediately, calm yet carrying a flicker of emotion that he recognized instantly. "I'm glad you came," she said softly as he approached. Her voice was gentle, but it carried an unmistakable sincerity. "I wasn't sure if I should leave the note, but I felt like I needed to speak." Michael nodded, careful to maintain a professional distance, though he couldn't deny the pull of curiosity and connection. "You didn't have to," he said, though his tone was softer than he intended. "I'm here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, empty, and charged with an energy that was entirely unspoken. Michael noticed the way Anna's fingers fidgeted slightly, how her shoulders relaxed when he stood near, and how her eyes lingered on him just a second longer than necessary. There was a vulnerability there, yes, but also a quiet courage that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I feel like we shouldn't be feeling this," Anna said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't deny it either. Every time I see you, I feel something. Something I can't ignore." Michael swallowed, his throat dry. He had felt the same way. The tension, the awareness, the magnetic pull that neither of them could explain. And yet, the situation was delicate. They were colleagues, bound by professionalism, and every instinct screamed caution. "I feel the same," he admitted. "But we have to be careful." She nodded, her gaze dropping momentarily before returning to meet his. "I know, but it doesn't make it any easier," she said. There was a pause, and the silence between them carried a weight neither expected. It was a moment of recognition, not action, an acknowledgement that the human heart did not always follow the rules of workplace conduct. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened, but subtly. Every glance across a meeting, every small gesture of concern, every shared laugh over coffee or during breaks carried an undercurrent of understanding. They had not crossed any boundaries, not acted on any impulses, yet the emotional intimacy was undeniable. Each interaction left both of them aware of the delicate balance they were maintaining. A professional decorum intertwined with an unspoken recognition of mutual attraction and admiration. One evening, the office was nearly deserted after a particularly long day. Michael was finishing up a report when Anna appeared at his doorway, holding a stack of files. She hesitated before speaking, as if weighing her words carefully. "I wanted to tell you," she said softly, "that you're important to me, and I don't know what to do about it." Michael's chest tightened. The honesty in her voice, the vulnerability in her stance resonated deeply with him. He realized that denying his own feelings would be as dishonest as ignoring the delicate, emotional bond that had grown between them. "I don't have the answers," he admitted, "but I know I can't ignore how I feel either." There was a long pause as they simply stood there, side by side, acknowledging the connection without crossing any lines. The air was charged with something profound, the recognition of emotional intimacy, the magnetic pull of shared feelings, and the unspoken agreement that they would proceed cautiously. In the following days, this balance became their new normal. They navigated the office with subtle gestures, shared smiles across meetings, brief moments of eye contact that lasted slightly longer than usual. Careful words exchanged over documents or presentations. It was as though a quiet understanding had settled between them, one that respected boundaries, yet acknowledged the undeniable tension of human connection. Then came the day of the big client presentation. Both Michael and Anna were required to work closely together, preparing slides, reviewing reports, and rehearsing the key points. The tension was palpable. Every brush of hands while passing documents, every shared glance as they discussed details, carried a quiet intensity. Neither spoke of it directly, yet both were acutely aware of the emotions running beneath the surface. During a brief pause, Michael noticed Anna watching him more intently than usual. Her gaze lingered, searching, and he felt that familiar pull in his chest. She leaned slightly toward him while handing over a report, and their fingers brushed lightly. It was a fleeting contact, almost accidental, yet both felt the electric current of awareness. Michael realized that the forbidden they were navigating wasn't an action, but the acknowledgement of deep, unspoken feelings later. As they finished preparing, Anna spoke again, her voice low and deliberate. "I don't want to regret not saying this," she admitted. Michael met her gaze, understanding immediately. "I don't either," he said, his voice steady yet warm. She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "I like you. More than I should. But I can't leave it unsaid." Michael felt the weight of her words, and he realized he shared the same feelings, admiration, connection, and a longing that went beyond the professional environment. But unlike a reckless impulse, this was controlled, respectful, and emotional. They acknowledged their bond without crossing boundaries, creating a space where both could express feelings safely. They worked side by side for the remainder of the evening, organizing documents, finalizing presentations, and sharing quiet smiles. Each interaction, while seemingly ordinary, carried the subtle charge of emotional recognition. They had discovered something rare, a connection that was deep, genuine and romantic in the purest sense, yet carefully constrained by respect and professionalism. By the time the office emptied completely, Michael and Anna left together for the elevator, their conversation light yet meaningful. There was a quiet understanding in the way they walked, a shared energy that neither could ignore. Outside, the night was calm, the city lights reflecting softly on the glass windows of the building. They parted at the entrance with a gentle acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, neither hurried nor forced, simply recognized. That night, Michael reflected on the events with a sense of wonder. It was rare to encounter someone who could stir such feelings without any overt action. Someone whose presence alone could bring a sense of vitality and anticipation. Anna, too, replayed the interactions in her mind, feeling a mix of excitement, caution, and profound emotional connection. Over the following days, they continued to navigate their professional relationship with care. Each glance, each shared task, each subtle smile became a thread in the growing tapestry of their connection. They had found a way to honor their feelings while respecting boundaries, creating a space where emotions could exist without disrupting the professional environment. By the end of part 2, both Michael and Anna understood that their story was not about impulsive action or inappropriate behavior. It was about emotional honesty, mutual recognition, and the courage to feel deeply, even in a constrained environment. They had discovered a rare form of intimacy, one that existed in glances, gestures, and shared moments, a connection that would shape their interactions for weeks to come. Daniel Harris had always thought he understood life. At 42, he was settled, respected, and stable. A beautiful house in Portland, Oregon, a loving wife named Emily, and 2 bright kids who adored him on paper. Everything was perfect. But behind that picture of perfection, Daniel felt something missing. He couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't love. He loved Emily deeply, but somewhere between raising kids, paying bills, and keeping up with work deadlines, something had gone quiet inside him. The laughter that used to fill their evenings had turned into the dull rhythm of routine. Emily was still the same woman he had fallen for, kind, intelligent, warm, but life had changed her too. She spent most of her days juggling her teaching job and their children's endless schedules. By the time she came home, exhaustion lived in her eyes. She'd smile, but the spark was fading. Daniel noticed it, but instead of talking about it, he buried himself in work. He had always been a dreamer, the kind of man who believed he could build anything: homes, careers, even happiness. But architecture had become his escape. It was easier to focus on blueprints than on the silence at dinner. Then one Monday morning, everything changed. His firm hired a new design consultant, Sophie Collins, a woman from Chicago with bold ideas and a sharp mind. She was younger than Daniel, but confident, with a calm energy that pulled people in. During her introduction, Daniel caught himself watching her. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was curiosity, the kind that grows quietly. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found reasons to work near her. She had a way of talking about design that made even dull meetings interesting. They began sharing small jokes, quick glances, moments of connection that no one else noticed. Sophie was passionate about her work, and Daniel admired that. She reminded him of who he used to be: driven, optimistic, alive. At home, things continued to drift. Emily had started sleeping earlier. The kids spent most evenings in their rooms, and Daniel's mind was often miles away. One night, as he worked late at the kitchen table, Emily appeared behind him. "You've been working a lot lately," she said softly. He looked up, guilt flashing across his face. "Big project," he said. She smiled faintly and kissed his cheek. "Don't stay up too late." She walked away, and Daniel watched her go, wondering when their love had started feeling like a quiet partnership instead of a story at work. Sophie began asking about his life. "You've got kids," she said one afternoon while reviewing sketches. "Two," he answered, smiling. "They're good kids. My daughter wants to be a teacher, like her mom." Sophie smiled, but her eyes lingered. "You talk about them like you miss them." That question hit him harder than he expected. He did miss them. He missed the old version of everything: Millie's laughter, Saturday breakfasts, even the chaos of family life before screens and schedules. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped feeling part of it. The more time Daniel spent with Sophie, the more he felt himself waking up. They began having coffee before meetings, laughing about their clients' impossible demands. Sophie shared stories about her own struggles, her recent breakup, her loneliness in a new city. There was an emotional honesty between them that Daniel hadn't felt in years. One evening, as rain poured over Portland, they found themselves alone in the office. The others had left early. Daniel was working on a model when Sophie appeared by his desk. "You're always the last one here," she said, smiling. He looked up. "Guess I like the quiet." She leaned against the table. "Or maybe you don't want to go home." Daniel froze. She wasn't wrong. The thought of walking into a house where silence had become the language of love made his heart sink. "It's complicated," he said finally. Sophie nodded. "It always is." They talked for hours, not about work, but life dreams, regrets, the way people drift apart without meaning to. It wasn't romantic, but it wasn't innocent either. When he finally stood to leave, she said softly, "Good night." Daniel. Something about the way she said his name made him feel seen. Truly seen for the first time in years that night. He lay in bed beside Emily, unable to sleep. He felt guilt twisting in his chest, but also something else: aliveness. Emily turned in her sleep, her hand brushing his arm. He looked at her and whispered to himself, "What am I doing?" Over the next weeks, Daniel tried to pull back. He avoided long talks with Sophie, tried to focus on home. He planned a weekend trip with Emily and the kids, hoping to fix what was broken. For a while, it worked. The laughter returned, the kids were happy, and Emily seemed lighter. But the moment they returned home, the silence crept back in. Then came the firm's annual conference, a 2-day event out of town. Emily encouraged him to go. "You deserve a break," she said. Daniel hesitated, sensing an invisible line approaching. But he went. The first day was busy with meetings and presentations. The second night, there was a dinner party. Daniel didn't drink much, but the room was loud, the lights soft, and when Sophie sat beside him, smiling in that easy way of hers, something in him cracked. After dinner, they stepped outside for air. The hotel garden was quiet, the city lights flickering in the distance. "You seem distant tonight," she said. Daniel sighed. "I shouldn't be here." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. "You're not doing anything wrong, Daniel. You're just ... human, if you wanted to believe that." They talked again about life's choices, regrets. When she placed her hand gently on his, time seemed to stop. He didn't pull away, but he didn't move closer either. It was the kind of moment that could change everything, and he knew it. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his hotel room, thinking about the path he was on. It wasn't about Sophie, it was about him. He was chasing the feeling of being wanted, of being important again. The next morning, he avoided her. During breakfast, she caught his eye from across the room but didn't say anything. When they returned to Portland, Daniel threw himself into work, desperate to bury the emotions that had begun to unravel his life. But emotions have a way of finding their way back. A week later, Sophie sent him a message. "You don't have to run from what you feel, Daniel. Maybe you just need to understand it." He stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. That night, Emily asked if he wanted to go for a walk. They hadn't done that in months. They walked quietly under the orange glow of the streetlights. She finally spoke. "You seem so far away lately." Her voice cracked slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" Daniel's chest tightened. "No," he said softly. "It's not you." She nodded, looking at the ground. "Then what is it?" He couldn't answer, because the truth was something even he didn't fully understand yet. Longing for something that shouldn't have mattered, but did. That night, as Emily fell asleep beside him, Daniel stood by the window, staring out into the dark. He thought of Sophie's message, her words echoing in his mind. "Maybe you just need to understand it." He didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end, the moment. His fantasy began to take over reality. He would tell himself it was harmless, that he was still the same man. But in the quiet corners of his mind, he knew something inside him had already crossed a line, and once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Daniel tried to move on after the conference to pretend nothing had shifted inside him. But pretending is exhausting, and soon the cracks started to show. He threw himself into work, skipped family dinners, and smiled at all the right times. But Emily felt the distance. She didn't say it, but Daniel saw it in her eyes. The quiet worry, the forced calm, the questions she didn't dare ask. At the office, Sophie acted as if everything was normal, yet there was a quiet understanding between them. They didn't talk about what happened at the conference, but their silence said everything. Sometimes she would glance at him during meetings, and he'd feel that same pull he was trying so hard to ignore. Weeks passed. Then one Thursday, Daniel found a handwritten note on his desk. It was from Sophie. Lunch. Just to talk. He hesitated, but went anyway. They met at a small cafe a few blocks away. It was a cloudy day, the kind that made everything look softer. Sophie smiled when he arrived. "You look tired," she said. Daniel laughed weakly. "Maybe I am." They talked about work first, but it didn't stay there long. Soon they were talking about life again, about how easy it is to lose yourself in routine, about how people can live together for years and still feel alone. Sophie wasn't trying to tempt him. She was trying to understand him. And that made it worse. When they left the cafe, the rain started. She shared her umbrella with him as they walked. They stopped at a crossing, their shoulders touching, and Daniel realized how far he'd drifted from the man he used to be. But when she looked at him with quiet kindness, he couldn't turn away. That night, he came home late. Emily was on the couch watching an old movie. "You already ate?" she asked. "Yeah," he lied. She nodded but didn't look away from the TV. It was a small moment, but it broke him a little over the next few months. Daniel's world slowly divided in two. One where he was the husband and father, doing what was right. The other where he felt alive, though guilty, in Sophie's company. They never crossed any physical line, but emotionally, Daniel knew he was falling. And once you start falling, it's hard to stop. Sophie didn't push him. Sometimes she went days without speaking to him outside of work. But when she did, her words always found their way to his heart. One evening she said softly, "I don't want to hurt you, Daniel. I just don't want you to forget you're human." That sentence haunted him. Emily, meanwhile, sensed everything. She started asking more questions. "Are you happy, Dan?" she asked one night as they cleaned up after dinner. "You've been so quiet lately." "Fine," he said quickly. But even to his own ears, it sounded like a lie. "Fine," she repeated, forcing a smile. That's what people say when they're falling apart. He wanted to tell her everything about the emptiness, the confusion, the feeling that something inside him had slipped away. But how could he? He didn't want to break her heart. So he stayed silent. Then came the project that changed everything. Daniel and Sophie were assigned to travel to Seattle for a client presentation. It was just one night, but Emily's face said everything when he told her. "Seattle, huh?" she said with Sophie. "It's work," he answered, trying not to sound defensive. Emily nodded slowly. "Of course. Just don't forget what really matters." The trip went smoothly, professionally at first. They presented their designs, received praise, and had dinner with the clients. But after the meeting ended, Daniel found himself sitting with Sophie in the hotel lobby. The air was filled with quiet jazz, the kind that makes conversations slower, softer. Sophie looked at him and said, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" He stared at his coffee. Every day. But she didn't say anything. And maybe that silence was what made him look up, because in that quiet, everything he'd been avoiding came rushing to the surface. He felt drawn to her, not because she was new or exciting, but because she understood him in a way he couldn't explain. They talked for hours about love, choices, and how life sometimes takes things from you before you even realize they're gone. At one point, she reached across the table and touched his hand. It was a small human gesture, but it burned in his memory long after. That night, Daniel lay awake in his hotel bed, the city lights flickering through the curtains. He didn't do anything wrong, yet he felt like he had. Emotional betrayal doesn't need action to leave scars. It lives in thoughts, in what-ifs, in the moments that almost happen. When he returned home, Emily greeted him with a hug. But it felt different, hesitant, searching. She looked at his face and whispered, "You look lost." He didn't answer. Because she was right. He was days turned into weeks. Daniel grew distant, quieter, unsure of himself. His children noticed too. One night, his teenage son asked, "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" Daniel smiled weakly. "Yeah, we're fine." But even he didn't believe it anymore. At work, Sophie seemed to sense the storm inside him. One day, she said gently, "You're not the same person I met." "I don't even know who I am anymore," he admitted. "Then maybe it's time to find out," she said. But finding himself meant facing the truth that his fantasy, this emotional escape, had cost him his peace. He started missing family dinners again, missing the sound of his kids laughing, missing Emily's voice calling his name. He wanted to go back, but guilt stood in the way. One evening, Emily confronted him. "I found your messages," she said quietly. Daniel froze. "You've been talking to her, haven't you?" He opened his mouth but couldn't lie anymore. "Yes." Her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to fall in love with someone else, Dan. You just had to tell me you were lonely." Her words cut deeper than anger ever could. She didn't shout, didn't curse. She just walked away. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room for the first time in his marriage. The next morning, he went to work, but he couldn't focus. Sophie tried to talk to him, but he couldn't even look at her. The weight of what he'd done was crushing. It wasn't Sophie's fault, it was his. He had built a fantasy to escape his pain, and now it had destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. He went home early that day, hoping to talk to Emily, to fix what was left. But when he walked in, the house was quiet. On the table was a note. "I need time. Please don't call me." He sat there for hours, staring at that single sentence. The kids were at Emily's mother's house. The silence around him was deafening. The home that once felt full now felt hollow. That weekend, he tried to reach out, but Emily wouldn't answer. He went to church alone, sat in the back row, and asked himself how he had ended up here. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He just wanted to feel alive again. But instead, he had broken everything that mattered at work. He asked to be reassigned. He couldn't face Sophie anymore. She didn't argue. She simply said, "I hope you find peace, Daniel." He nodded, unable to speak. Months passed. Emily stayed with her mother, taking the kids. Daniel tried to rebuild himself, stopped drinking, started therapy, and faced his regrets. He wrote letters to Emily, not asking for forgiveness, but trying to explain his heart. He realized then that fantasies don't heal what's broken. They just hide the wounds for a while. And when the illusion fades, the pain comes back stronger. He saw Sophie once more by accident, months later at a bookstore. They exchanged polite smiles, but nothing more. Both of them had paid the price for their mistakes. When Daniel went home that night, the house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a place to start over, even if he had to do it alone. He looked at a photo of Emily and the kids on the wall and whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't know if they'd ever come back, but for the first time in years, he knew who he was, a man who had lost himself in a fantasy, and who was now fighting to find his soul again. Winter came early that year, and Daniel felt every bit of it. The days were short, the nights long, and silence had become his closest companion. Emily had taken the kids to live with her mother, and though she hadn't filed for divorce, her distance spoke volumes. Daniel moved through each day like a man carrying invisible weight, still going to work, still doing what was expected, but hollow inside. He avoided people who knew him well. Small talk felt fake, laughter impossible. The house echoed with emptiness, every corner a reminder of what he'd lost. The kids' rooms were untouched, their drawings still pinned on the walls, toys left on shelves. Sometimes he'd walk into those rooms and just sit quietly, trying to remember when life was simpler. Work didn't help much. Sophie had transferred to another branch after the Seattle trip. And while Daniel was grateful, her absence made him face himself even more. He could no longer hide behind distraction. He'd stare at his reflection in the office window some nights and wonder who he had become. One evening, his friend Mark from the office stopped by. Mark had known Daniel for years and didn't come to offer pity, just quiet company. They sat with coffee in the dimly lit kitchen, rain tapping softly on the windows. "You look tired, Don," Mark said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I am mostly tired of myself." Mark didn't press. "You know, life doesn't end because we make mistakes," he said. "But it sure feels that way until we start doing something about it." That sentence stayed with Daniel. The next morning, he made a decision. He would try to make things right, even if he couldn't undo the past. He started small. He wrote Emily a letter, not to beg or defend himself, but to tell the truth. He told her how lost he had felt, how sorry he was, and how he had learned that love wasn't about excitement or escape, but endurance. He didn't send it right away. He rewrote it 3 times until it sounded honest, not desperate. Then, one cold February morning, he mailed it. Weeks went by with no reply. But writing that letter changed something in him. It gave him a kind of peace he hadn't felt in months. He began to rebuild his routines, cooking for himself, exercising, even volunteering at a local shelter on weekends. The people there didn't know his story, and that anonymity felt healing. One Saturday, while serving food at the shelter, Daniel met an older man named Frank, who had lost everything to addiction years ago. Frank told him, "You can't fix what's gone, but you can build something new from the pieces." Daniel nodded, realizing how true that was. Spring brought small changes. The days got longer, and Daniel started painting again, a hobby he'd abandoned years ago. His first painting was of a lighthouse surrounded by fog. To him, it symbolized hope, faint, distant, but still shining. Then one evening in April, he received a message from Emily. Just one line, "Can we talk?" He sat frozen for a moment, reading the words over and over. When they finally met, it was at a quiet cafe near the old park where they used to take the kids. Emily looked different, stronger, calmer, but her eyes still carried sadness. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," Kay Neal said softly. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But I read your letter." They talked for hours. No shouting, no tears at first, just honest words. Emily told him how betrayed she had felt, not because of what he did with Sophie, but because of how he had disappeared emotionally long before that. "I felt like I lost you years before she came into the picture," she said. "You were here, but you weren't with us." Daniel nodded, ashamed but understanding. "I know," he whispered. "I thought I was trapped in routine, but really I was trapped inside myself." Emily sighed. "I'm not sure what happens next. I can't promise anything. but I wanted to see if there's something left worth saving." Those words gave Daniel a spark of hope. They began meeting once a week. Short walks, coffee conversations, nothing forced. Sometimes it was awkward, other times it felt almost normal. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, fragile but real. Daniel never saw Sophie again, though sometimes he thought about her. Not with longing, but with quiet reflection. She had been a mirror for his emptiness, not the cause of it. He realized that chasing fantasy is easier than fixing reality, but the cost is always higher than expected. Months passed. One evening, Emily invited him to dinner with the kids. The atmosphere was tentative but warm. His daughter Lily talked about school projects. His son Noah told bad jokes that made everyone laugh. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like a father again. After dinner, Emily walked him to the door. "I'm not saying we're back together," she said, "but maybe we can start over slowly." Daniel nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "That's all I want," he said. They didn't rush anything. Some days were good. Others brought old wounds back. But Daniel was patient this time. He knew rebuilding trust wasn't about grand gestures, it was about consistency. Showing up every day, no matter how hard. By late summer, they were spending weekends together again, hiking, visiting local fairs, even watching old movies like they used to. Emily began to smile more, and the kids grew comfortable around him again. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" she asked. Daniel shook his head gently. "No, but maybe we'll be something better." She didn't answer, but she reached for his hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt peace. Years later, when Daniel looked back on that time, he didn't see it as just a story of betrayal or loss. It was the turning point of his life, the moment he faced who he truly was and what he almost destroyed. He learned that love isn't about constant happiness. It's about showing up even when everything feels broken. He often told people, fantasy is easy. Reality is where the soul grows. Emily forgave him, slowly but surely. They renewed their vows on their 20th anniversary, surrounded by their children and closest friends. Daniel didn't promise perfection that day, only honesty and effort. After the ceremony, he stood with Emily, watching the sunset. She smiled and said, "You've changed." He smiled back. "I had to. Losing you taught me what real love costs." She squeezed his hand. Then maybe it was worth something after all. Daniel never forgot the emptiness he once felt, nor the mistakes that brought him there. But instead of living in guilt, he used them as a reminder that every choice has weight, and every moment of weakness can still lead to redemption if faced with courage. In his later years, Daniel began mentoring younger men at his church, sharing his story not to justify it, but to help them understand how easily one can lose sight of what truly matters. He would tell them, temptation doesn't always come wearing danger. Sometimes it comes dressed as comfort. When people asked if Emily ever truly forgave him, he'd smile and say, "She didn't just forgive me. She helped me find myself again." The years rolled on peacefully. His children grew up, married, and had families of their own. Every Sunday dinner was filled with laughter, the sound of second chances, of love that endured storms. And sometimes, late at night, Daniel would sit by the window, watching the quiet street outside, and think back to that younger version of himself. The man who had been so desperate for something more that he nearly lost everything real. He'd whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude that life had given him a chance to make it right, because in the end, his story wasn't about infidelity. It was about rediscovery, about losing everything that didn't matter to finally understand what did. He had once thought his fantasy had cost him his soul, but in facing that truth, he had found it again.